Welcome to this explainer. We often tend to think of childbirth as just this painful medical event, right? Or maybe just a routine hospital procedure. But the source material we're digging into today paints a completely different and, frankly, a way more fascinating picture. It describes labor not just as some mechanical process, but as the ultimate biological symphony. It's this incredibly delicate dance requiring four perfect, deeply interconnected conditions to progress normally. To map this all out, we're going to use a framework known as the 4Ps. We'll be looking at power, passage, passenger, and finally, psychology. Each of these elements absolutely has to be in perfect harmony for a successful delivery. All right, starting with number one, power, the driving force. Now, when we talk about power in this context, we're really talking about the biological engine of childbirth. These are the uterine contractions that literally push our traveler, the baby, forward, while simultaneously doing the heavy lifting to open the cervix. But it's actually super critical to distinguish when this engine is truly starting, what clinical guidelines call true labor, versus the false starts of false labor. See, true labor isn't just about experiencing pain. It's marked by regular intervals between contractions that actually get shorter and shorter over time, alongside real, measurable cervical dilation. False labor, well, that lacks any lasting regularity and it doesn't change the cervix at all. It's essentially the body revving the engine, but not actually putting the car in gear. So to make sure this engine is running both properly and safely, medical professionals assess the power using three very specific steps. First, they look at frequency, which means literally counting the number of contractions in a 10-minute window. Then they measure duration, clocking exactly how long a single contraction lasts in seconds. And finally, they gauge intensity. They do this by observing the mother's physical reaction and physically feeling the firmness of the abdomen. You simply cannot accurately track the progress of labor without looking at all three of these metrics together. And this brings up a brilliant but very delicate biological balance. The power absolutely must be strong enough to progress labor, right? Otherwise, things just stall. But if those contractions are too intense, or if they last way too long without adequate resting intervals, they actually decrease uterine blood flow, because during a contraction, the umbilical cord and the blood vessels are being compressed. So too much power without a break can physically compromise the baby's oxygen supply. It's a real balancing act. Moving on to number two, passage, the pelvic route. Let's take a look at how that power pushes into the specific physical terrain our traveler has to navigate to reach the outside world. The normal female pelvis is this incredibly complex, bony canal. It is absolutely not just a simple, straight tube. It actually consists of the inlet or brim up at the top, followed by a curved circular cavity in the middle that swoops forward, and then finally the outlet right at the very bottom. Now, the crucial point at the very start of this journey, the pelvic inlet, is actually shaped like an oval. The transverse diameter, meaning the side-to-side distance, is 13 centimeters. That's actually wider than the anteroposterior, or front-to-back diameter, which sits at just 12 centimeters. So this entryway is specifically designed by nature to be wider from left to right. But here's where it gets wild. The dimensions completely flip at the pelvic outlet. Down at the exit, that side-to-side distance narrows to 11 centimeters, while the front-to-back space suddenly becomes the widest part. This anatomical reality means our traveler literally has to rotate their entire body mid-journey just to successfully exit this constantly changing terrain. And if there happens to be a physical mismatch between the size of the baby and this specific bony root, it results in something called Cephalopelvic Disproportion, or CPD for short. Whether the maternal pelvis is just a bit too narrow or the baby's head is exceptionally large, this disproportion basically acts as a massive physical roadblock. It can completely arrest labor, making safe passage pretty much impossible without clinical intervention. Which brings us perfectly to number three. Passenger navigating the canal. Let's talk about the traveler themselves and their absolutely incredible mechanisms of adaptation. Because the baby is not just being passively pushed here, they are a highly active participant. To actually fit through those shifting pelvic dimensions we just looked at, the baby has to actively adapt using three main mechanisms. First up is flexion. This is where they bend their chin all the way down to their chest to present the smallest possible circumference of their head. Second is rotation, which is turning to navigate those changing oval shapes of the pelvis we talked about. And third is this truly fascinating biological feature called molding. Molding is just an incredible biological survival tactic. It's where the baby's skull bones physically overlap. Since a fetus's cranial bones aren't fully fused yet, the intense pressure from those strong uterine contractions actually forces the frontal and parietal bones to slide over one another at the sutures. This literally temporarily shrinks and alters the shape of their head during the journey, allowing them to squeeze right through those incredibly tight spaces. Now, the specific position of our passenger also heavily dictates the mother's physical experience. The ideal setup is occiput anterior, where the back of the baby's head faces the mother's front. But if a baby is facing the wrong way, in the occiput posterior position, it puts massive, direct pressure right on the mother's spine. And according to the medical texts, this causes severe, continuous backache and frequently leads to intense maternal exhaustion and prolonged labor. And finally, we arrive at number 4, psychology, the mental engine. This is perhaps the most often overlooked secret weapon of the entire process. The mental state of the mother isn't just about feeling comfortable, it's a literal mechanical driver of birth. Stress is absolutely not just in the head. Fear physically halts the biological engine. Anxiety directly decreases the production of oxytocin, which is the exact hormone necessary to fuel those uterine contractions, leading straight to a prolonged labor. Simultaneously, stress spikes adrenaline, and that actually suppresses the body's natural pain-relieving endorphins, which means the mother physically feels more pain. It's a cascading effect. Because of these direct hormonal links, keeping a mother calm with a supportive environment is a literal requirement for the mechanics of birth to function properly. Having constant companionship, practicing active listening, providing genuine reassurance, these are not just modern luxury comfort measures. They are strict physiological necessities. They're what keep adrenaline low, oxytocin high, and that engine of labor running smoothly. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Now that we understand just how deeply the mind controls the physical reality of the 4 Ps, power, passage, passenger, and psychology, how must we radically change the way we support women in labor? When we view birth through the lens of this biological symphony, optimizing the environment isn't just a nice-to-have option, it's a completely critical part of medical care. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible science behind the human experience.